This video will show you how to correctly punctuate quotation marks. Quotation marks are used around quotations, things that are said or written word for word. With every quotation mark we use an attributive tag, that is your he said, she said phrase. Sometimes the attributive tag goes before the quote, such as, he said I am a criminal justice major. We need to show what was said in quotation marks and separate the he said, the attributive tag, from what he said with a comma. It would look like this. He said, comma, quotation marks, I am a criminal justice major, period, quotation marks. Your end punctuation always goes inside the quotation marks unless you are including an in-text citation in a research paper. Other times, the attributive tag goes after the quote, such as, I want to be a police officer, he said. We still need to put what he said inside quotation marks, and we still need to separate the quote from the he said. It looks like this. Quotation marks, I want to be a police officer, comma, inside the quotation marks, he said. But we can also put that attributive tag in the middle of a quote. And sometimes that he said interrupts a complete sentence like this. If I want to be a cop, he said, I have to get a degree in criminal justice. If we take out the he said, we're left with, if I want to be a cop, I have to get a degree in criminal justice. Because that's a complete sentence all by itself, we're still going to put everything he said in quotation marks, so I will need two sets of quotation marks here. But I'm going to offset the attributive tag from both parts of the sentence with commas. Quotation mark, if I want to be a cop, comma, quotation mark, he said, comma, quotation mark, I have to get a degree in criminal justice, period, quotation mark. Sometimes that attributive tag interrupts two complete sentences like this example. I needed a criminal justice degree, he said. I chose to go to Bryant and Stratton. If we take out the he said, we're left with I needed a criminal justice degree, which is one complete sentence, and I chose to go to Bryant and Stratton, which is another complete sentence. So we need to still separate what he said with quotation marks, but somewhere in there we need a period to show that one sentence is ended, and it would look like this. Quotation mark, I needed a criminal justice degree, comma, quotation mark, he said, period, end of the complete sentence. Now we just have the rest of the quote. Quotation marks, I chose to go to Bryant and Stratton, period inside your quotation marks. Well, sometimes we use a question mark or an exclamation point when we're saying what someone said. So when the attributive tag comes before the quote, such as, she asked, where does the question mark go? We're not doing a whole lot differently here. We're still separating what she asked with quotation marks. We're still separating the attributive tag from the quote with a comma, just now we're leaving that question mark inside the end quotation marks. Here's another example. She yelled, wow, your hair looks awesome. All we're doing differently here is leaving the exclamation point at the end inside the final quotation marks. You don't need any extra periods here. You already have end quotation with either the question mark or the exclamation point, so there's no need for any extra periods. If you put your attributive tag after the quote, this is a little different than what we did before. Where does the question mark go, she asked. Before, we had put a comma right here, right in between the quote and the attributive tag. But now this is a question, and it still needs to look like a question. So now we're just going to leave the question mark. Same thing with exclamation points. You don't need any extra commas. That end punctuation is enough to show the difference between the quote and the attributive tag. Now is where we get really tricky when we're quoting inside of a quote. This is only ever really used in fiction writing when you have one character who is saying something another character said, or in a research paper if you're quoting an article you found but that author is quoting another article. So you use double quotation marks for the outside quotation and single quotation marks for the inside quotation, and those single quotation marks on a keyboard are simply the apostrophe key. So here's an example. And let's assume that Ron said everything after we see Ron said, and that Sheila said everything after she said. So Ron said, do you know what Sheila said? She said European guys are hot. This means Ron said everything from here all the way to the period, and Sheila said everything just right here. Okay, so you need to show the difference between what she said and what Ron said. So Ron is quoting Sheila, and it looks like this. We have double quotation marks around everything Ron said. Then we have single quotation marks around everything Sheila said, which gives us this very odd looking triple quotation mark at the end. You'll notice both attributive tags are still separated with a comma, and our final end punctuation is still inside all of those quotation marks. The last thing you need to know is how to tell the difference between a direct and an indirect quotation, because they are punctuated differently. A direct quotation is when someone opens his or her mouth and the exact words are spoken. In writing, in a research paper, this is when you're taking someone else's writing exactly word for word. So here's an example. Billy asked Jen, do you want to go to the party with me? Well, if Billy opened his mouth and the exact words that came out were, Jen, do you want to go to the party with me? You need to put quotation marks around that, and it would look like this. And of course, we capitalize the first letter in a sentence in quotation marks. Okay, so Billy asked Jen, and the words that came out are, do you want to go to the party with me? Sean said the water is freezing. If Sean opened his mouth and the exact words that came out are the water is freezing, we would punctuate it like this. An indirect quotation is when you're summarizing what someone said, but it's not the exact words that were spoken. In research paper writing, this is the equivalent of paraphrasing. So Billy asked Jen if she wanted to go to the party. Well, Billy didn't open his mouth and say, if she wanted to go to the party. So we don't need to punctuate it. Same thing with Sean told us that the water is cold. Sean did not open his mouth and say that the water is cold. So there's no direct quote, so we don't need any quotation marks. That sums up how to punctuate quotation marks correctly.